So now we're going to move into a strategy or a really easy methodology we call HELP, and it stands for Hear, Evidence, Learn, Proceed. But let's back up and understand anxiety, first of all, and what that really means. Anxiety, we heard from all the experts today, right? But it's really birthed from that unknown. It's when we do not communicate effectively and people start to panic. And it's usually because of 3 or 4 questions. And the first question is, who can I speak to, right? Is there somebody that is out there that I can speak with? And did they help me, right? After I spoke with them, can they even help me? Like, this is how anxiety is started. But we've realized that as we go through any process, when somebody comes to us with a problem, when somebody comes to us even with a strategy, we have to really worry about validation. Not worry, we have to focus on validation and confirmation to make sure that the person feels comfortable. And we look at basically these 4 things, right? Somebody wants to be heard, and they want to make sure that you actually understood them before you tell them if you can help them. So let's run through a scenario where, that hot potato shows up at your door and it's, it needs immediate attention. And this is where we've seen some executives panic, okay? And that is somebody runs in and they're like, hey, I've got a big problem. And some executives say, well, hold on. I don't have time for this right now. And that is very fair. It's very fair, but knowing the quicker you can get to the hear stage, the calmer your employee is going to be. And we'll get into that as to why it is. So let's speak about hear and what really matters, but it comes down to the 4 W's. And that is, what, who, when, and where. What happened, who was there, when did this happen, and where, right? Where, those are always the basics. And you want to just get facts. That's it. There is no whys, no how questions right now. It's just the facts, right? And you stay here until you're very, very clear. What happened? I say what happened 5 times sometimes. What happened? And then what happened, right? Just continue to get, and this is that testing phase of learning. Somebody's learned some new information, now they're recalling, but you don't want them to actually be thinking or interpreting the information as much as just telling you what their perception is in its rawest form, and then you're going to repeat it. That's the only statement you should be making at the hear phase. And you're going to ask if you got it right. Now, this is really interesting because if we go back to our anxiety, the first 2 things we've already checked off, right? Because we've said, do you understand me? Right. And then our anxiety and our problem starts to calm down. Now, as soon as we've listened to somebody, they automatically feel better, right? And they feel like somebody else now has that information. So their anxiety is going to go down. But just this stage alone, you've already made success because a lot of people don't know how to hear effectively. Sometimes they jump right to the whys or the hows, which is where we're going. But in evidence stage, there's only 2 steps. And the first one is, how did you learn it? Right? How did you learn about this problem that you have? Right? What's new? Now, you really want to track this as a leader. You want to learn, because if there's a certain source or a pattern of where people continue to learn this information, and then when you get to the second stage, which is how did you confirm this information? Did the person actually find the evidence? There's a really interesting way that you should be tracking the pattern. That is, is there a constant stream of people learning information from a certain individual or from a certain system or a process, and it's never really confirmed? Gaslighting and so forth. But you as an organization has to decide, is this true or false? Or you as an individual, you have to decide, is this true or false, depending on how HELP is being used, right? This could be an individual or a whole team. But you or the team have to decide, is the evidence true now? Is this truly a problem? If it's not, it's simple, right? We've looked at it, there is no evidence. So please, next time you bring something forward, let's make sure that we have a little bit more evidence. It's a coaching opportunity, okay? But then you have to figure out, learn, and this is the why question. right? And you have to ask the first person, why did this happen? And that person deserves the right for you to ask them first. So whoever brought you this problem, if they're able to confirm it and show evidence, they've done a lot of work now, right? So ask them why, what's the deeper meaning, right? Why? And see if they have an opinion first. That doesn't mean you just take that opinion. Then you go back with your leadership team and you sit down and you look at it together. Now, the first thing you do as a leadership team is you thank the person. Thank you for telling us. That's really important. I'll tell you, there's nothing worse than when somebody shows up with a problem. It's real. They show evidence, and then the person doesn't even thank them for bringing it forward. So make sure that you really pay attention to that. But then as a team, as an executive team, figure out what that evidence really means and then decide together, right? Decide together, what does this mean? We have new evidence. What have we learned from this? Okay. And that's really important. Before you go on to that learning stages, you really have to make sure that you understand. And that's a we. Maybe it's an I. If it's an individual team or an individual learner and you're running a help session with an employee, that's different. But in this case, we're talking about an executive team, and everybody has to be comfortable with what they've learned and agreed upon is accurate together. Okay? Because then you move to proceed. And proceed doesn't mean that you have to change. Okay, so you do have to change. But what you're going to change is what you do as an executive team here. Okay, so everybody thinks that once something comes to light, they have to move right away, but that's not necessarily true. But this is the second biggest failure rate in HELP. The first one is you can't hear properly. And the second one is that you don't do something once somebody has come to you. And if you go back to our anxiety stages, which we're going to check off right away, you'll realize where I'm going with this. But you have to make sure that you communicate at this stage, right? So this is where you will look at all the information as a team, and then you're going to explain it, right? If you have to. Again, certain information doesn't have to be explained to certain levels within the organization, but you're going to have to be really confident that this evidence, one way or another, it either changes the current plan or it doesn't change the current plan. But either way, you have to communicate that information back, okay? And then you've won, right? Then you've won. It's a great chance to be a really impressive leader, right? It's to explain it. And then you've checked the last two boxes off, right? Can you help me? Yes. I brought something to you. Now I can come back and explain to you why we're not going to change. If it's, within your circle of influence within the business, but you still are going to explain as much as you can to calm the person down. Thank you for bringing this. We've looked at it. We've reviewed it. We're not going to change the current plan, but this is going to give us something to think about in our next planning session, right? But the person feels very calm. They've come to you. They've given you a problem. You have taken it. You've received it, taken it serious. You've asked for their opinions, and then you've proceeded one way or another. And now you know how to help. That's it. So hopefully that helped everybody, and have a great day.